is the CBS Evening News. Bob Schieffer sitting in tonight for Dan Rather. Good evening. Well, new troubles tonight for the nation's space program. Problems that could force yet another delay in the launch of the Space Shuttle Discovery. Bruce Hall has our report.
Frustrated engineers say gremlins, glitches, and malfunctions at equipment that has not been used since the Challenger accident are plaguing NASA and threaten to delay the shuttle launch until at least October. The latest breakdown came today when a key practice countdown was aborted, when a pump malfunctioned, a leak developed in a hydrogen line, and electrical sensors did not work properly.
We don't have a goal to launch at a specific date. We have a goal to launch safely as soon as we can. So we're going to go and fix those things if they occur.
Returning the shuttle to space is being compared to trying to operate a car after it sits in a garage for 2.5 years. The astronauts say it will work, but there will be problems.
There has never, ever been a perfect, no-failure flight, and I don't think there ever will. This machine's just too complicated. It's made by human beings.
NASA engineers have now come up with a plan to fix the most serious problem on the shuttle, a gas leak in the rocket steering system. The engineers are suggesting leaving the shuttle on the launch pad, sending people through the cargo bay, cutting a 20-inch hole, giving workers direct access to the complex maze of pipes and tubes where the gas leak is located. Engineers have spent 2 weeks studying the small leaking connector.
We know that the leak is somewhere on the sealing surface because they were able to observe bubbles in that general area.
Before the Challenger accident, NASA might not have fixed the gas leak, but now every malfunction is being studied and repaired. That has left NASA's launch schedule in shambles, with new delays being announced almost every month. Bruce Hall, CBS News, Atlanta.
Federal appeals court in Washington ordered NASA today to release the cockpit tape containing the last words of the Space Shuttle Challenger crew. News organizations have said the tape is needed to verify NASA's story that the astronauts had no advance warning of trouble. NASA has only released a partial transcript of what the crew said before Challenger exploded, citing concern for the feelings of the astronauts' families. President Reagan called today for a quick resolution of the POW MIA issue with Vietnam, but he was cautious about the latest Vietnamese offer of help. White House correspondent Terrence Smith with that.
15 years after Americans left the battlefield in Vietnam, President Reagan today expressed hope that the lingering questions about servicemen still unaccounted for can soon be answered. In an address to an organization of MIA families, the president welcomed Hanoi's new offer to conduct joint searches for the missing men.
The Vietnamese government has once again raised our hopes for a breakthrough. We've witnessed promises made in the past by Vietnam that were not carried out, but we're following this offer up aggressively.
More than 2,000 Americans are still listed as missing in Indochina, but the White House repeated today that it has no credible evidence that any remain alive. Vietnam has long sought to link cooperation in the search for MIAs to an overall improvement in relations, something Washington has rejected. But today, the president said that the U.S. will consider restoring relations with Vietnam if Hanoi makes good on its pledge to withdraw its troops from Cambodia.
If they're serious, then it's time to move rapidly to resolve the POW-MIA issue. For the deep pain that this issue brings to the American people will turn against Hanoi if it lingers past a Cambodian settlement.
Senator John McCain, a prisoner in Vietnam for more than 5 years, is urging the administration to establish low-level diplomatic ties immediately to break the logjam on the MIAs.
If there are Americans alive in Southeast Asia, we want them back. And there has been no progress on that aspect of that issue.
But White House officials want concrete results first, an actual Vietnamese withdrawal from Cambodia and a satisfactory accounting of the missing Americans before any diplomatic recognition. Terrence Smith, CBS News, the White House.
Rain over some dry-as-dust areas of the Farm Belt today brought promise that some crops might be saved, but the Agriculture Department reports that the season's drought already has raised July prices for grain and other raw products 10% higher than a year ago. Frank Currier reports.
Scattered rains this month across the drought-baked Midwest have greened the fields and lifted spirits on the farm.
This is the greenest it has ever been around here in 1988.
In Ohio, Illinois, and Indiana, up to 7 inches of July moisture has revived the multi-million-dollar soybean crop. And While for some it's raising hopes of saving corn and wheat not yet destroyed, farmer Howard Parlberg has all but given up on his corn crop.
We've been so dry so long that it just takes more than a light shower to do any amount of good.
Well, sir, if you need to talk again, please call in.
In recent weeks, calls to this farm crisis hotline in Iowa have fallen off. But what briefly seemed the beginning of an end to the drought brought false expectations.
No amount of rain is going to bring us back anywhere close to a normal crop. As the rains come, they basically stabilize the situation.
Farm experts say nearly 15 inches of rain are needed to bust the drought in the hardest-hit northern Great Plains. Near Balta, North Dakota, Edmund Hager and his son have no crops to lose. The soil was so dry on their 2,700-acre farm, they never planted.
I'm optimistic next year, maybe next year's our year, and I don't wish this on anybody.
In Clinton County, Ohio, a 4-inch rainfall last week may have helped field crops, but with pastures burned out, Ken Pickard and David Gray are preparing to feed their livestock straw from the barn.
The prices are down. Everybody's dumping cattle on the market right now.
Down south at Memphis, the Mississippi River is 18 feet below normal. It rose 6 feet last week, but it's falling again. Falling like the price of grain futures every time there's a hint of rain. At Chicago's Board of Trade this week, soybeans plunged to a 2-month low.
For the moment, the market is telling that the drought is over, but the weather is not a concern.
But it is for forecasters who promise little hope for drought-breaking rain or relief from the heat, as August looms the most critical month in the farmers' summer-long struggle to save crops. Frank Courier, CBS News, Chicago.
Tender, dry forests continued to burn today in regions of Alaska and 4 other western states, but what officials call the nation's top priority blaze threatened Rapid City, South Dakota. Terry Drinkwater reports on today's progress fighting that fire.
Before dawn today, the fire had burned over 3,000 acres of the Black Hills of South Dakota. The bad hotspots were deep in the canyons. Firestorms starting in the scrub brush, then the tall pines go. Here, it's been the worst fire season in a century.
It's hot and dry. It's been about around 100, I guess.
The wind, gotta watch that wind.
If it's going like it is now, I think we can handle it.
And handle it they did today because the wind stayed calm. The fire is now all but contained. The worst of the losses were houses in the rural suburbs of Rapid City. This was an aluminum trailer home, incinerated.
Once the wind hits it and the temperature builds up, it just basically sort of explodes.
It also all but melts farm equipment. This was Ted Pfister's barn. His losses?
4 tractors, a baler, rakes, mowing machines, that type thing.
What does this do to you?
It sets me back about 100 grand.
Today, 3 generations of the Ayler family were searching through what's left of the family homestead. It had been there since 1912. Merlin Ayler is glad the old man doesn't have to see this. He's 91 now and away in the hospital.
He was quite a storyteller of his life, and we were getting tapes of his stories, and they were in there too, so we won't have those. I feel very bad.
The losses are all the more painful because officials are saying this fire was started by an arsonist. And tonight, as the mop-up operation continues, he is still at large. Terry Drinkwater, CBS News, Rapid City, South Dakota.
Democratic presidential nominee Michael Dukakis campaigned today for the factory vote in Wisconsin and Michigan as the candidate of good jobs for everybody. But he gave few details on how he'll make that happen, and Bruce Morton has our report on that.
Hi, how are you? Dukakis toured Ganton Technologies, a plant aides said was succeeding partly because it worked hard to retrain workers so they could advance within the company. Afterward, Dukakis said that's the kind of economic growth he wants to see everywhere.
Those are the kinds of jobs, and this is the kind of economic growth and the kind of future I want to build for every single citizen in this country of ours.
If that were the right theme for Wisconsin, where Chrysler's Kenosha plant plans to lay off workers, it echoed even more strongly at an auto workers local in Flint, Michigan. Unemployment rate 17%.
We can continue to write off whole regions of the country, or we can invest in economic development in every part of this country and in the creation of good jobs.
Dukakis's basic message of good jobs for everyone plays well in states like Michigan and Wisconsin. Wisconsin Democrats say he may be the first Democratic presidential candidate to carry the state since Jimmy Carter 12 years ago. But the question remains, won't he eventually have to be more specific?
I don't think the governor will lay out a comprehensive budget. I think he will continue to describe the kinds of programs, the kinds of measures he supports.
But is that good politics? Maybe.
But Ronald Reagan set the rules in 1980 and again in 1984. He said, let's not worry about the specifics. Let's decide who is the most presidential person. Who do you want to put your trust in?
Michael Dukakis, a candidate in the Reagan image? Well, the crowds wave flags, patriotism is in, and he continues to avoid the hard specifics of how much he'd spend on what. Bruce Morton, CBS News, Sturtevant, Wisconsin.
Dukakis' running mate Lloyd Bentsen and Vice President Bush were on the daycare beat today. Daycare has become a hot political issue this year. Bentsen made an unscheduled campaign trip to the UCLA Daycare Center to see and be seen with the children. He showed up there after George Bush made a scheduled visit today to a daycare center in suburban Virginia. Bush would not tell the kids who his running mate is going to be, but he did disclose to the children that he was special because he said, I can talk to fish. Maybe he can. Still to come on the CBS Evening News, Martha Teichner on a movie that was literally bombed off the screen in South Africa, and Bob McNamara on the flood of bicycles across Iowa this bone-dry summertime. The anti-apartheid film Cry Freedom premiered today in South Africa with the approval of government censors, but the freedom didn't last very long. Martha Teichner has our report.
Cry Freedom lasted half a day in South African theaters before police moved in and seized copies of the film, waiting at least till matinees had ended and reels were rewound. Its short run was marred by 2 bombs and dozens of bomb threats, the kind of violence the government feared when it overrode its own censor board's decision to approve Sir Richard Attenborough's film.
We don't need that sort of meddling in South African affairs. How many people has to die before Richard Attenborough is satisfied?
Flabbergasted that the movie was approved in the first place, whites as well as blacks lined up for hours to see it, convinced Cry Freedom would be banned by the end of the day. The few thousand South Africans who actually saw Cry Freedom had their first chance ever to watch a movie version of their own troubled racial history.
Our movement seeks to avoid violence.
But your own words call for direct confrontation.
That's right. We demand confrontation.
Isn't that a demand for violence?
Well, you and I are now in confrontation, but I see no violence.
The film depicts the life of black activist Steve Biko and his violent death in 1977 while in police custody, seen through the eyes of his friend, white newspaper editor Donald Woods. This evening, theater managers were left with the awkward task of telling eager customers the film could not be shown.
Again, South Africans are treated like children, all of us. That we are not allowed to see our contemporary history, our immediate history expressed in films such as this, and to make our own judgments about it.
In banning Cry Freedom, the government has made the judgment for them, in its own words dismissing the film as nothing more than crude anti-South Africa propaganda. Martha Teichner, CBS News, Johannesburg.
UN Secretary General Perez de Cuellar denied today that his peace talks with Iran and Iraq are deadlocked. He said he's in constant touch with both sides and expects progress soon. Perez de Cuellar also assured Robin Higgins that he is working for the release of her husband, a U.S. Marine held by pro-Iranian terrorists in Lebanon. Colonel William Higgins was abducted 5 months ago while working as a UN truce observer. The Security Council today condemned the kidnapping.
We admire,
A setback today for the Reagan administration drug testing program right in its own backyard. A federal judge refused to allow the Justice Department to go ahead with plans to begin testing employees for drug use starting next month. It turns out that Congress is not the only place in Washington where Middle East tension is being felt. There are now signs of it underground. Robert Shackney has the story.
The Washington subway found itself embroiled in the Arab-Israeli conflict today. 296 ads posted in subway cars and paid for by the American Arab Anti-Discrimination Committee depict scenes of West Bank violence. They call for an end to American aid to Israel and compare Israeli policy to the Soviet Union and South Africa. The ads and the subway system decision to allow them to run drew immediate protests from Jewish organizations.
We think the message distorts, is inaccurate, is provocative, and is totally wrong.
Subway system officials say a 1984 Court of Appeals decision which permitted an anti-Reagan administration ad applies in this case as well.
If Metro accepts political advertising, they must accept all political advertising and cannot pick and choose those ads that conform to something that we would like to see up there.
As far as the ad sponsors are concerned, the Washington subway is the perfect place to spread the message.
We thought we'd reach a lot of people over a relatively long period of time.
Jewish groups question whether the subway is the right place for any political message.
All we're doing is what is in the grand old American tradition of having a full, fair, and open debate.
The ad sponsors believe that the Jewish protests so far have only drawn more attention to their Arab cause. The Jewish groups are considering a counter-ad. Robert Shackney, CBS News, Washington.
The Reagan administration announced plans today to sell 5 F-15 jet fighters to Israel. Congressional approval is expected. Congress has blocked the sale of similar planes to Saudi Arabia at the urging of pro-Israeli lobbyists. But now Israeli leaders believe that may have been a mistake because the Saudis have found another dealer. Bob Simon reports.
It is being called the arms deal of the century, and it has gone not to the United States, but to the United Kingdom. For Americans, the issue is simple: thousands of lost jobs. Congressional action, barring the sale of F-15 fighters and Maverick missiles to the Saudis, persuaded them to give up on Washington and go to the International Arms Bazaar.
We're talking somewhere probably between $2 and $3 billion a year for the next 15 years. That represents 50 to 75,000 jobs.
How did the American defense industry lose the contract? The original Saudi request was fought energetically by the pro-Israel lobby in Washington. Israelis are now saying that may not have been in their best interest.
Israel's friends in Washington don't take their signals from Israel.
Lobbying organizations have their own bureaucratic imperatives, one of which is to stay in business.
But it's the British who are in business now. What the Saudis are getting from Britain includes 50 Tornadoes, 60 Hawks, 90 helicopters, and 2 spanking brand new air bases to put them on. It's the Tornadoes that have the Israelis worried.
Oh, it's bad for Israel. The Tornado, the attack version, is considered a very good aircraft.
The Israeli Air Force, which showed off its American-made F-15s last week, does not like the idea of these planes in Saudi hands, but officials say, at least when the Americans sell to the Arabs, they sell with restrictions, with political strings attached, and usually with a quid pro quo for Israel. When the Saudis buy British, the Americans lose and the Israelis get nothing.
Nothing could be less favorable to us than the present condition. If we simply become agents for diverting arms from the United States to Britain, we're getting the worst of all possible worlds.
Now the pro-Israel lobby has come out against a $2 billion aircraft and missile request from Kuwait. The administration wants the order. When Israeli Defense Minister Rabin was in Washington last month, he told congressmen he was not against it. There is increasing tension between Israelis and their friends in Washington. Israelis are worried about a backlash.
It worries us that the Americans would consider Israel as causing damage to the American people.
The American arms industry and its friends in Washington say Kuwait is the moment of truth.
What I would say to the Congress is when you're in a hole, don't dig deeper.
And the Israelis agree. The message from Jerusalem to everybody in Washington: sell.
I believe our preference should be clear. Prevent arms sales if you can, but if not, prefer an American context to any other context.
There's little that can be done now about the Saudi deal, but there are indications tonight that its reverberations across 6,000 miles might be about to force a compromise over the deal with Kuwait. Bob Simon, CBS News, Tel Aviv.
Our Bob McNamara didn't go to the big European bicycle race, the Tour de France. He stayed home. This is what he found this summertime.
Morning, folks. Morning, folks. Have a good trip. Have a good trip. Have a good one.
Sioux City, Iowa, and 8,000 riders start the weirdest week on wheels, the RAGBRAI, short for the Des Moines Register's annual Great Bicycle Ride Across Iowa, the Tour de Corn.
It's like a family reunion. It's like mom and apple pie. You don't get anything better.
Past tidy country churches and jamming a back road route that zigzags more than 430 miles across Iowa in 7 days, it's a cycling circus of peddlers and pets, a roller skater, retired farmers like Vern Jansen, people from every state and 10 foreign lands, and kids they bring, like Bryant and Justin Langa with Dad Bill.
They behave best when they're asleep or on the bike, so we ride a lot.
Lucky for many, it's a ride, not a race. But even strung out 20 miles, the bikers bunch.
It's sort of hard to see it with all these riders, because if you're not careful, you'll wind up running into somebody.
And they do. Though it was a treacherous spill, scrapes were minor. But a broken jaw here sent the rider home. A stop for fresh water at the Neville's Barnyard, refreshed by country kids. The RAGBRAI is now tattooed on Iowa's mind, not as much as a tour de corn as a celebration of pork. With the likes of Father Gerald Hot Lips Zenson entertaining, the bikers find Iowa one pork stop after another. Bratwurst and sauerkraut in Anthon for breakfast, and every town at noon, pork ribs and pork fritters for lunch. Even in tiny Mount Carmel, the chance to feed the RAGBRAI is like answered prayers for rain. And if anybody knows this to be a boon to little towns, Governor Terry Branstad should.
They may do more business in one day than they normally would do in a month.
I never seen so many thirsty people.
What the bikers don't do for Iowa pork, they do for Iowa grain. Miller time is any time they're not in the campgrounds dead asleep. When they finish tomorrow in Fort Madison, thousands more will be done of the notion that Iowa is unfriendly and flat.
The only mountain in Iowa.
The ache may swear them off bikes for months, but they will be back in a year, almost as sure as sunup tomorrow. Bob McNamara, CBS News, What Cheer, Iowa.
Dan will be back on Monday. Have a nice weekend.